envelope sitting on the marble table in the foyer. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already processed. He had done it all behind her back. All she had to do was sign her portion, and that would be it. 6 years of marriage, erased with the stroke of a pen. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The soft buzz of rolling luggage and murmurs of distant announcements filled the air of Murtala Muhammad International Airport, but Olana barely heard any of it. Her eyes flicked constantly between her phone screen and the glass entrance, scanning every man in a suit who passed by, hoping one of them would be him. She was dressed in a cream-colored blazer over a sleek black dress, her long braids tied back into a neat ponytail. Beside her sat a pair of tickets to London, a travel itinerary neatly clipped to her passport, and a suitcase with a gold ribbon tied around the handle, Obina's favorite color. It was meant to be a fresh start. A week in London. No board meetings. No assistants. Just the two of them, like it used to be before the walls between them grew so high they couldn't hear each other anymore. She had suggested it over dinner weeks ago. Let's go away for a while, she had said, reaching for his hand across the table. Why? He replied, sipping his wine without looking at her. Because I don't want to lose us. He didn't answer that night. But 2 days later, he gave her the passports and said, fine, book it. And now here she was booked, dressed, ready, but alone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed his number again. Once, twice, 3 times. The number you are calling is currently switched off. She swallowed the growing lump in her throat. Her boarding time flashed on the screen above. 9:45 a.m. Final boarding. 10:05 a.m. It was 9:57. Her eyes were now frantic, darting from gate to escalator, from entrance to seating area. Every second that passed, a part of her hoped he would run in last minute, apologizing, smiling that charming smile, maybe with flowers or even just a warm hand on her back. Nothing. Suddenly, a ping on her phone lit up. A message from Ngozi, her housekeeper. Madam, I clean your room. I see paper on the bed. Look like from Olga. Should I send you? Her heart stopped. Yes, send it now. Olana typed back, hands shaking. Seconds later, a photo appeared. A folded note in Obina's handwriting. She tapped to enlarge it. Donwe, you're free now. I've signed the divorce papers. I'll handle the press. Oh, her lungs forgot how to breathe. Her knees felt like they would give way. A sharp ringing filled her ears. She had been dumped. Not in private. Not even with a face-to-face conversation. But at the airport. With a note, like a package being returned to sender. Final call for flight 205 to London Heathrow. Final boarding call. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She refused to break down here. Not in front of strangers, not like this. She reached for her suitcase handle and turned toward the gate. But then she stopped. She could board the plane, cry all the way to London, spend the week hiding in a hotel suite, eating chocolates and wondering what she did wrong, or she could turn around and start her life over, without Obina, without the weight of waiting for someone who had already let go. Olana slowly walked out of the departure hall, head held high, her heart in ruins, but her soul, strangely, was waking up. The note had ended a marriage, but it also opened a door. She didn't know it yet, but what felt like the end was just the beginning. The ride home from the airport was a blur. Olana sat stiffly in the back of the black Prado SUV, staring out the window at the crowded Lagos streets as they zipped past. Hawkers weaving between cars, Okadas darting like fish through a stream, life continuing as though her world hadn't just shattered into 1,000 sharp, silent pieces. Her driver, Musa, glanced at her through the rearview mirror a few times but said nothing. Smart man. He must have sensed it, that something had happened, that his madam was no longer the same woman who had left that morning full of quiet hope. When they reached the gates of the mansion in Ikoyi, the guards rushed to open them. But the house no longer looked like home. It felt like a tomb, expensive, spacious, and cold. She stepped inside, and the air conditioning hit her like ice. Gone were Obina's shoes by the door. Gone was the scent of his cologne. What remained was stillness, and a small envelope sitting on the marble table in the foyer. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already processed. He had done it all behind her back. All she had to do was sign her portion, and that would be it. 6 years of marriage, erased with the stroke of a pen. Olana stared at the papers for a long time. Then she turned and went upstairs. In her bedroom, the bed was made. Neatly. The pillow she used to rest her head on was fluffed, as though no one had ever cried into it. She let herself fall onto the floor. The sob tore out of her throat before she could stop it. She cried until the ache in her chest felt like fire, until her throat burned, until there was nothing left to cry. 2 weeks later, she stayed inside, away from the cameras and the society gossip blogs. Of course, they had noticed. Where is Mrs. Olana Ease? Billionaire Obina spotted alone in Paris with mystery model. Trouble in paradise? She didn't care. Not anymore. The press only ever saw the gowns and gala smiles. They never saw the quiet tears, the long nights she sat by the balcony waiting for him to come home, or how he'd come back smelling like perfume and guilt but never offer her honesty. Ngozi, her housekeeper, came into the room quietly one afternoon, holding a tray of tea and rice. "Madam, please try to eat something small." Olana shook her head. "I'm fine." "No, you are not," Ngozi said softly. "But you will be." It was the first time anyone had spoken to her with truth. Not pity, not distance, just warmth. That small sentence hit her harder than anything Obina had said in years. Later that night, Olana stood in the mirror and looked at herself. Not at the designer dress or her name, but her face, her eyes, the woman she had become. She whispered to herself, "You are not broken. You are becoming." 1 month later, Enugu. The air was different in Enugu. Calmer, fuller, less burdened by the noise of Lagos expectations. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She just needed to breathe, to start again. Her late uncle had left behind a small patch of family land on the outskirts of Nsukka. Untouched, overgrown, forgotten. The locals used it as a shortcut through the bush. But Olana stood in the middle of the land, eyes closed, and saw something else. Community, project, purpose. If I could build a life with a man who gave me nothing, then I can build something for myself with everything I've learned. It was the first time she'd smiled in weeks. Enugu smelled of wet earth and promise. It had rained the night before, and the red soil of Nsukka clung to Olana's heels as she walked the edge of the land her uncle left behind. It wasn't much, about 2 acres, scattered with weeds and wild grass. But to her it was freedom. She ran her fingers through the tall grass, the wind brushing her cheeks, and whispered to herself, "This is where I begin again." After years of living under Obina's shadow, dictated by his vision, his empire, his rules, she was finally standing on her own ground. And she intended to make something of it. The villagers had been curious when she first arrived, especially the elders. A wealthy Lagos woman returning to rural Enugu? Alone? Rumors sparked, but Olana didn't flinch. Instead, she asked to meet with the town chief and elders. She explained her idea. A housing estate for young families, simple, beautiful, and affordable. A blend of modern and local architecture, built with community labor and sustainable materials. The old men were impressed by her clarity. The women were impressed by her humility. "I'm not just building homes," she said. "I want to build roots, and I want to do it here." One of the elders nodded. "Then let us bless the land. And your journey." Olana didn't have years of construction experience, but she had passion and connections, people who still respected her, even after Obina's betrayal. She reached out to her late father's old friend, engineer Kenechukwu, a retired architect and former lecturer at UNN. He agreed to help her draw plans and mentor her through the development. "You know," he said one evening, peering over his glasses, "when you were young, your father always said you had a fire in you. I see now he was right. Under his guidance, Olana began to study zoning laws, building materials, property valuation. She attended workshops and spoke with contractors. She even joined a real estate mentorship group for women in the East. The girl Obina once called just a housewife with a pretty smile was now sitting across tables negotiating land surveys and price margins. By the third month, the project had a name: Exwife Luxury Estates. Exwife meant hill, and it reminded her of strength, of rising, of elevation. The very thing she was doing with her life. She designed the logo herself, an elegant U shaped like a house, surrounded by gentle curves of rising hills. When her first investors, a group of diaspora Igbo women, saw her proposal, they signed without blinking. Within 6 months, the first 2 units were underway. Not many, but enough to prove her concept. And still, she didn't call Obina. She didn't post her progress online. No headlines. No drama. She was building in silence. And in strength. One evening, as she sat outside the site office, just a refurbished container with a fan and desk, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. Olana, said the voice on the line. She froze. It was Obina. His voice was calm, too calm. I heard you're in Enugu. Someone mentioned a construction project. You're really doing this? She smiled faintly. Yes, I am. A long pause. Then, you've changed. She leaned back in her chair, watching the sun set beyond the distant hills. No, Obina. I just stopped waiting for someone to believe in me and started believing in myself. She ended the call. No anger, no pain, just clarity. The ballroom of the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A soft jazz band played near the stage, and the clink of fine glassware filled the air as Nigeria's most powerful elites gathered for the annual Pan-African Investment Gala. Obina Ease arrived late, as always, his tailored tuxedo hugging his tall frame, a diamond-studded Rolex peeking from beneath his sleeve. The cameras flashed as he entered, his latest model girlfriend on his arm. Everyone turned. Obina Ease, our real estate lion, the MC announced. The man who redefined luxury living in West Africa. He flashed his signature smile, posed briefly, and made his way to the VIP table. The attention fed him. The admiration kept him sharp. In this world, he was king, until he saw her, standing across the ballroom mid-conversation with a dignitary from the UAE, was Olana. She wore a sleek emerald gown, her shoulders bare, her chin high. The room seemed to hush around her. There was something untouchable about her now. Grace wrapped in steel. For a moment, Obina forgot to breathe. Ladies and gentlemen, the host began, tapping the mic. Tonight, we welcome a new face making waves in the African housing sector. She has signed a joint venture with international investors and is now set to launch Nigeria's first eco-luxury estate built in a rural zone. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Exwife Luxury Estates, Ms. Olana Exwife. The applause was thunderous. Obina froze. CEO? Exwife Estates? She had used her maiden name and made something of it. Olana stepped forward, elegant and confident. She didn't glance his way. We are building more than homes, she said into the mic. We are building access, dignity, beauty that doesn't only belong to the wealthy few. She ended with a quiet smile and a firm nod. The applause returned, louder this time. Obina's mouth was dry. Later, during the networking session, he approached her slowly, cautious, like a man nearing fire. Olana, he said softly. She turned, expression unreadable. Obina, he offered a polite smile. You've grown into something powerful. She looked him over once. I didn't grow into it. I always was. You just didn't see it. He swallowed. Can we talk? About what? She asked, tilting her head. The life you walked out of? Or the one I created without you? He winced, caught off guard by her calm defiance. I made mistakes. I didn't think you'd survive? She cut in gently. You didn't think I'd fly. That's the part that bothers you, isn't it? He couldn't answer. Before he could gather his thoughts, Her business partner from Dubai returned and placed a hand on Olana's lower back. Subtle, respectful, but possessive. "Everything all right?" he asked her. Olana smiled. "Perfect." She turned to Obinna one last time. "Thank you, Obinna, for leaving. You set me free." Then she walked away. Obinna stood there in the middle of the ballroom, powerful, handsome, rich, but somehow the smallest man in the room. Obinna sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the skyline of Abuja from the glass window. The night lights shimmered below, but they held no beauty for him. In the background, his girlfriend scrolled through her phone, giggling at memes and posting selfies with half-baked captions. She didn't notice the storm brewing behind his stillness. "Babe, should I post this with #LifeWithABillionaire or #SoftLifeQueen?" she asked. He didn't answer. She pouted and tossed her phone aside. "You've been acting weird since that event. Did someone say something?" Obinna stood up, straightened his cuffs, and said coldly, "I have a meeting in the morning." "Now? But it's late." He looked at her as if she were a stranger. "Pack your things. They'll have someone drop you off tomorrow." Her jaw dropped. "Wait, are you breaking up with me?" But he was already walking away. The next morning, Obinna stared into his bathroom mirror, running a hand over his bearded chin. He had built estates across Nigeria. His name opened doors. He made presidents wait. But last night, standing in front of Olana, he had felt small. She wasn't bitter or broken. She was thriving. And that haunted him more than anything. "She doesn't need me anymore." He had always assumed she would linger, that no one would love her the way he did, that she would fade quietly into the background of his success story. But Olana had written her own. And now Obinna was the outsider looking in. A week later, he arranged for a mutual contact, an older businesswoman named Madame Ifeoma, who had once mentored them both, to invite Olana to a private luncheon. To his surprise, Olana accepted. But she came alone, dressed in a crisp white suit, heels clicking confidently as she walked into the rooftop restaurant. "Obinna," she greeted politely, offering a hand. He stood. "Thank you for coming." "I came out of respect for Auntie Ifeoma," she said, sitting across from him. "Not for you." He nodded, accepting the hit. "Fair." The silence stretched. The waiter arrived. She ordered sparkling water. He ordered nothing. "I just wanted to say, I regret how I handled things," he began, voice low. "You didn't deserve to be left like that. You were always good to me." Olana gave a slow smile. "And you were always good at pretending." That cut deeper than he expected. "I know I lost you," he said, "but maybe we can talk, just as friends. Or," she held up a hand. "Obinna," she said gently, "you don't miss me. You miss the version of me that stayed quiet, that followed you, that let you take up all the space in the room." He lowered his gaze. "I'm not that woman anymore," she finished. "And I don't have room for people who only value me when I become visible." The waiter returned with her water. She took a sip, then stood. "I forgive you," she added, grabbing her purse. "But I don't owe you access to me anymore." Later that week, Olana was invited to speak at an international real estate summit in Kenya. Her speech on redefining rural wealth went viral. CNN Africa picked it up. Investors flooded her inbox. She was becoming a movement. Meanwhile, Obinna sat in his Lagos office, watching the interview replay for the third time. She had mentioned the land in Nsukka, the people, the hills, the vision, but never once did she mention him. She had built an empire of her own, and he was no longer part of it. And it shook him. For the first time in his life, Obinna felt like a man standing on unshaken ground, but not because it was stable, because it no longer belonged to him. The penthouse in Lagos was silent. No laughter, no footsteps, no soft music humming in the background. Just the mechanical hum of the refrigerator and the low, distant sound of the city. Obinna stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, cradling a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The view below, Victoria Island's glittering lights, traffic weaving through the streets, once made him feel powerful, important. Now it felt like noise. He turned and looked around his home. The walls were adorned with expensive art. The floors were polished marble. Everything was pristine, and yet it felt like a museum. A cold, curated life. Every piece chosen to impress guests, not to comfort him. The emptiness wasn't in the room. It was in him. He opened the drawer of the console table beside the window and pulled out a leather photo album he hadn't touched in months. It held photos from his wedding to Alana. She had worn a cream lace dress that hugged her like a whisper, her smile radiant, her eyes full of hope and trust. He, in his custom-designed black tuxedo, grinning like a man who thought he owned the world, and the woman beside him. He flipped through the pages slowly, like a man examining evidence at a crime scene, because that's what it felt like. A crime. One he committed without a weapon, without blood, but one that left a woman in pieces at gate 12, and a man now haunted by what he lost. Later that night he called Madame Ifioma. "Auntie," he said, voice tight. "How did you move on when your husband left you?" There was a pause. Then, "Obina, are you hurting because you lost Olana? Or because she doesn't want to come back?" He sighed. "Both. I'll tell you something," she said gently. "Some women break when they're abandoned. Others, they break through." He closed his eyes. "She broke through," he whispered. "Yes, and you're still standing still." In the weeks that followed, Obina tried to distract himself. Boardroom deals, high-level dinners, expensive gifts. But nothing worked. At one point, he visited an estate construction site for one of his projects in Lekki. The workers were slow. The project manager was behind schedule. The investors were growing impatient. He remembered how Olana had spoken at the gala, how passionately she described involving local communities, building with the people, not over them. For the first time, he felt embarrassed by the size of his empire. It had no soul. That night, he walked into the master bedroom and instinctively reached to the nightstand drawer. There it was, a single, faded Polaroid of him and Olana laughing in the kitchen. Flour on their faces, unstaged, real. He slumped onto the bed, the room heavy with silence. "I had love," he murmured aloud, "and I traded it for power." By the end of the month, he sat at his desk and began to write a letter. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter.
Ejar Olana.
"I don't know where to begin. Maybe I'm writing this more for myself than for you. Maybe I'm hoping these words will give me peace, even if you never read them. You were the best part of me, and I never saw it until you left. Now I walk around full of wealth but completely bankrupt where it matters. I don't want anything from you. I just needed you to know. I see you now, and I'm sorry. Obina." He folded it, sealed it, addressed it, but never mailed it. Some things are too late to fix, and some losses you live with. Olana sat under the large almond tree outside the Ugu Luxury Estates Phase 2 site in Nsukka, a stack of building approvals in one hand and an iced zobo in the other. The breeze played gently with the edges of her scarf, and the hum of life around her. Builders calling out, children laughing nearby, felt more fulfilling than any cocktail party she'd ever attended in Lagos. She was content. She was grounded. But contentment, she was learning, didn't mean life would stop testing her. He came with an international housing delegation from South Africa. A tall, cocoa-skinned real estate consultant with a calm confidence and a dimple that betrayed a hidden warmth. Namdi Mbatha. He was in Nigeria for a cross-border housing partnership and had heard whispers of a woman in Nsukka building something extraordinary. So, of course, he made the trip himself. They met during a tour of the Phase 2 site. "I've studied a lot of rural development projects," he said, smiling as he walked beside her. "But yours feels personal." Olana smiled, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Because it is." They talked for hours about architecture, land ethics, and community inclusion. But somewhere between concrete specs and investor models, the air between them softened. "You remind me of someone I knew," he said. "Only, you're more fire." She laughed gently, surprised that it didn't feel flirtatious. It felt natural. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Obina was unraveling. His board meetings were becoming tense. Investors whispered that his empire had peaked. His latest project in Ghana faced environmental protests. Even his once loyal assistant submitted a resignation letter with a quiet nod. He was losing grip. One night, while scrolling through his phone, he saw a photo, Olana and Namdi at a small tech housing conference. They weren't touching. They weren't even looking at the camera. But the chemistry between them was unmistakable. His chest tightened. Someone else is standing where I used to. 2 letters arrived on Olana's desk that week. One, from Obinna, handwritten. There's a conference in Lagos next week on regenerative housing. I'll be speaking. I'd like you to be my guest. No pressure. I'd just like to listen to you speak again, even if from the audience. The second, from Namdi, heading back to Johannesburg in 2 weeks. But before I go, I'd love to take you to dinner. No business. Just 2 people with passion for building things. Maybe something new. Olana sat by her window that night, staring at both envelopes. The past and the future. Regret and possibility. Obinna had hurt her, deeply. But he had also sparked the fire that led her to this moment. And a part of her, buried somewhere deep beneath layers of healing, still felt the ache of what they could have been. But Namdi was peace. He saw her as she was now, not who she had been. She picked up her pen, wrote 2 responses. One was a gentle decline, the other an acceptance with a simple line, "Dinner sounds perfect." And in that moment, she realized she didn't want to revisit the man who left her behind. She wanted to walk forward with the one who showed up. Obinna stood backstage at the Regenerative Housing Conference in Lagos, adjusting his cufflinks. His speech was ready. His slides were curated. His confidence, however, was not. He kept glancing toward the rows of seats filling up in the hall, his eyes scanning for her. She wasn't there. Not in the front. Not near the exits. Not anywhere. He had imagined her entrance countless times. Olana walking in, dressed in grace and dignity, their eyes locking in a moment heavy with everything unsaid. But the seat reserved for Ms. Olana Ugwu remained empty. His heart sank deeper than he expected. An hour later, just as Obinna prepared to take the stage, the host paused the event for a surprise video message from a panelist who couldn't attend. A familiar face filled the giant screen. "Olana!" The audience erupted in applause. "Good afternoon, everyone," her recorded message began. She stood in her Nsukka office, backlit by sunlight and rural charm. "I would have loved to be there in person, but am currently working on a women-led housing project in the East. I believe true regeneration doesn't begin with buildings, it begins with people." Obinna stood frozen backstage, listening to her calm voice echo through the conference room. There was no mention of him, no subtle jab, no emotion, just purpose. Olana continued, "Ugwu Estates was born from the ashes of personal loss. But what I lost in comfort, I gained in clarity. My vision now is not just to build houses, but to build legacy." The crowd cheered. Obinna felt the finality in her tone. She hadn't just moved on. She had transcended. After the event, Obinna sat alone in the green room. His speech lay untouched on the table. His phone buzzed with congratulations from investors and associates. But none of it mattered. The one person whose attention he craved had already given him her answer. Silence. No text. No call. No note. And that silence was louder than any insult, more piercing than any slap. It said, "I don't need to be angry to prove I've healed. I don't need to speak to prove I've moved on. I don't need to come back to prove I've won." Back in Nsukka, Olana watched the recording from her own laptop. Namdi sat beside her, a gentle smile on his face. "You speak with so much calm," he said, "like someone who's already at peace." She looked at him and nodded. "I think I finally am." He took her hand. No pressure, just warmth. Outside, the wind rustled through the newly planted trees surrounding Phase 2. Children played in the open field. Workers laughed as they laid tiles on a new block. It wasn't Lagos. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. And here she was home. Murtala Muhammad International Airport buzzed with its usual rhythm. Suitcases rolling, flight announcements humming, lives in motion. It had been nearly 3 years since Olana last walked these halls. The same halls where her marriage had ended, where she had stood in pain and silence, watching her dreams dissolve in a departure lounge. But today was different. Today she was departing on her terms. She wore a navy blue blazer over white tailored pants, a soft head wrap around her braids, and carried a passport with multiple stamps, proof that the world had opened to her since the day Obina closed his door. As she moved toward her gate, she paused briefly to check her boarding pass. Olana? The voice made her freeze. She turned slowly, and there he was, Obina, alone, dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans. No assistant, no entourage, just him. She blinked. Obina. He looked at her like he wasn't sure if she was real or a memory walking through time. "You're traveling?" he asked. She nodded, holding up her ticket. "Johannesburg, speaking at a Women in Housing Summit." A faint smile touched his lips. "Of course you are." She said nothing. "I didn't know you'd be here," he added. "But maybe that's not an accident." She raised a brow. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, staring at the floor briefly. "This is the same gate, you know? The same terminal. Same airline. This is where I left you." "I remember," she said softly. "I've replayed that day in my head more times than I can count," he confessed. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had shown up." Olana looked at him. Older now, more grounded, a little worn. "Then you would have delayed my growth," she said. "Maybe even destroyed it." He flinched but nodded. I needed to say this before it's truly too late," he said. "You didn't deserve what I did. You were the best part of my life, and I left you behind like luggage I didn't want to carry." Olana was quiet. "But now I see it clearly," he went on. "I didn't leave you because you weren't enough. I left you because you were more than I was ready for." She studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, gently, not with scorn, but with peace. "I forgive you, Obina," she said. "But I've moved beyond the version of myself who needed that apology. I've outgrown that pain, and the love that came with it." Final boarding. The intercom buzzed overhead. "Final call for Flight 311 to Johannesburg. Final boarding at Gate 7. She had just the strap of her handbag and took a step forward. He watched her, eyes shining with regret. "Will I ever see you again?" Olana turned to him one last time. "Maybe in the headlines," she said with a warm but distant smile. "But not in my life." And with that, she walked toward the gate, heels steady, back straight, free. Obina remained standing where she left him, alone among the rush of passengers. The same way she once stood alone. Only now, he was the one left behind. The plane soared above the clouds, a silver bird cutting through endless blue. Olana sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the West African horizon. Warm orange bathed her face. Her heart was still. She had thought seeing Obina again would stir the storm. But instead, it felt like placing a final brick on a house long completed. A chapter sealed not with revenge or drama, but with peace. The woman who once begged for answers had become the woman others sought for wisdom. She had become Olana Ugwu, not as an extension of anyone, but as herself. A conversation at 30,000 feet. Namdi leaned toward her from the next seat. "You okay?" She smiled. "I am. I thought I'd feel more emotional, but it feels like the end of a story I no longer belong to." He nodded. "Some stories are only meant to teach us who we are." She chuckled lightly. "Then that chapter taught me resilience, grace, and the art of letting go." He reached into the seat pocket and handed her a travel journal. Inside, tucked between notes, was a hand-drawn design of a sustainable women's co-housing complex, her next project. "I had my team draft this," he said. "Thought it might be our next collaboration, but only if you're in." She studied the sketches, the possibilities. "I'm in," she said, eyes shining. Back in Lagos, Obina returned to his penthouse, now quieter than ever. His staff greeted him with polite nods, but the energy was different. He walked into his office, looked out the glass wall over the city skyline, and saw none of it. He sat at his desk and stared at the framed newspaper headline. Olana UGW wins Pan-African Housing Innovation Award. Below it was a quote from her acceptance speech. Every time someone tells you you're not ready, remember. Flowers bloom in silence. Let them see the garden later. Obinna smiled faintly. She had bloomed, and he had missed the season. Months later, Olana's Johannesburg Housing Summit ended with a standing ovation. She was invited to Rwanda, Kenya, and even Geneva to speak. The rural girl from Nsukka was now a continental voice in urban transformation. One afternoon, while walking through the Phase 3 site, she watched children run through wide corridors and clean water flow from new pipes. This was her legacy, not fame, not fashion, but impact. And as she watched a little girl draw in the sand with a stick, she saw her own younger self in that dusty image, dreaming under pressure, unseen. She bent down beside her. "Do you want to build houses like this someday?" Olana asked. The girl beamed. "No, I want to build cities like you." Tears welled in Olana's eyes. But this time, they were made of pride. Years later, Olana passed through the airport again. A billboard outside flashed her image with the caption, "Africa's Daughter, the woman who built dreams from abandonment." She smiled at it, not from vanity, but because it reminded her that healing is the most silent revolution of all. And when the boarding gate closed behind her, it did so not with heartbreak, but with closure. 3 years after her Johannesburg summit, Olana Ugwu's name had become synonymous with dignity-driven development across Africa. From East Africa's refugee integration estates to renewable housing in Senegal, her projects weren't just architectural marvels, they were social revolutions. But success came with new weight. At an international expo in Nairobi, just as she unveiled plans for the Pan-African Women's Housing Alliance, a reporter asked a question that caught her off guard. "Ms. Ugwu, we hear Obinna Chukwuma's foundation is launching a parallel housing initiative. Some say he's trying to reclaim his influence. Any thoughts?" Olana smiled professionally. "The more hands building homes, the better. Legacy isn't a race." But inside, the words lingered like smoke. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Obinna sat at his long boardroom table, his new non-profit director flipping through blueprints. "I want something that echoes heart," he said. "Not just glass towers." "You mean something like Olana's projects?" she asked carefully. He looked up. "Yes, like hers, but better." He didn't admit it out loud, but every brick he laid now was a quiet attempt to catch up to the woman he had once left behind. He had built an empire. She had built a legacy. Their names kept showing up side by side at UN events, international journals, NGO awards. Everyone talked about them, compared them, until finally, they were both invited to keynote the same event. Africa 2030, Inclusive Cities for Tomorrow. Venue, Kigali Convention Center, Rwanda. The same city Olana was preparing to break ground for her first women-owned smart city estate. She stared at the invitation, her thoughts cloudy. Was this fate again, or a final test of grace? The Kigali Convention Center glowed under the Rwandan twilight, its domed roof shimmering with lights like stars descending to earth. Inside, leaders, engineers, and innovators from across Africa gathered, their name tags displaying countries instead of titles. It wasn't just a conference, it was a blueprint for a new continent. And at the center of the program were two names side by side. Keynote speakers, Obinna Chukwuma, founder, Chukwuma Foundation. Olana Ugwu, founder, Motherroot Africa. They hadn't spoken since the airport. Backstage silence. Olana stood behind the curtain, flipping through her speech notes. Calm outside, but inside, her heart beat a little faster. Then she felt it, a presence. She turned. Obinna stood there, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked older, his eyes less arrogant, more human. "Didn't think we'd share another stage," he said softly. "Life like circles," she replied, then returned to her notes. "I followed your work," he said. "You've done incredible things, Olana." She glanced at him. "I didn't need to prove anything, Obinna. I just refused to remain a footnote in your story." He nodded slowly, visibly absorbing the weight of her words. "I'm not here to compete," he added. "I came to listen, and maybe learn." For a moment, silence hung between them. Not heavy, not painful, just real. The speeches. Obinna went first. He spoke not like a tycoon, but like a man learning humility. He talked about transformation, about accountability, about the need to fund communities, not just build for them. Some applauded politely. Then came Olana. Her voice carried across the room like the wind of change. "We do not build homes just for shelter, we build to restore dignity. We are not saviors. We are partners. And the women in Africa are not waiting to be rescued. They are ready to lead." The hall erupted in applause. Obinna stood near the edge of the stage, clapping too. But his eyes, they held a quiet storm. He had once left her behind. Now she stood miles ahead. After the applause. Later, at the rooftop cocktail reception, a young Malawian architect approached Olana. "Your words changed something in me today. Thank you." Olana thanked her, then turned to find Obinna watching from afar, a glass in hand. He approached. "You've become a force, Olana," he said, almost in awe. "No," she corrected. "I always was. You just never saw it." He looked at her, not with regret this time, but with something else. Respect. "Do you ever wonder?" he began, but she held up a hand. "I don't. Wondering is for those who still wait." I moved on, fully, and for the first time he believed it. As the night wore on, Kigali's skyline sparkled, mirroring the stars above. Olana stood at the balcony edge, wind lifting her silk scarf. Alone but whole. She wasn't a story that ended at a gate. She was the woman who rewrote the ending. Her transparency earned her more trust than ever before. NGOs rallied. Governments re-engaged. And the anonymous attacks stopped almost too suddenly. She didn't thank Obinna publicly, but she knew what he had done behind the scenes. Not to rescue her, but to finally stand beside her as an equal. Lagos was chaotic as ever, noisy, bold, unapologetically alive. As Olana's car turned off the Lekki Ape Expressway and approached the dusty lot in Sangatito, her eyes brimmed with quiet emotion. This empty land was about to become Dinwanyi City, City of Women, a revolutionary residential and commercial community entirely designed, managed, and owned by women. It would feature affordable eco-homes, free childcare centers, women-led security units, startup hubs, solar grids, and a university for girls in tech. It was bold, it was controversial, and it was hers. At the press conference, Olana stood in front of dozens of microphones, wearing a sleek Ankara blazer and gold pins in the shape of tiny shovels. "We are not waiting to be included in the cities men built. We are building our own." Social media exploded. Hashtag Dinwanyi City trended for days. Feminist groups hailed her. International donors pledged more support. Women from every corner of Nigeria sent messages. "I want to live there. How can I help build? Thank you for seeing us." But not everyone was celebrating. 2 days after the press conference, a conservative senator called it an insult to men. A powerful Lagos traditional ruler warned that such a city threatens our social balance. And worst of all, Ngozi Ada, Olana's estranged former university roommate and now the head of urban development for Lagos State, filed an injunction, questioning the city's legal zoning permits. Ngozi and Olana had once dreamed together of designing cities. Now she was blocking the gate to Olana's dream. When asked at a public forum about it, Ngozi smiled and said, "We welcome women in infrastructure, but not ego disguised as progress." It stung. Not because it was true, but because Ngozi knew exactly what to say to hurt her. As Olana studied the injunction documents late one night, Namdi walked in, frowning. "You're not going to like this," he said, handing her a tablet. On the screen was a video interview. Kane Chukwuma, Obinna's younger brother, a rising political voice, was giving a talk. "The idea of a women-only city sounds like gender apartheid to me. If someone wanted to build a city just for men, there'd be riots." Olana exhaled slowly. Kane was always sly, always jealous of Obinna's success. and now, clearly, of hers too. Do you think he's behind the zoning pushback? Namdi asked. Olana shook her head. No, Kane doesn't operate like that. He likes the sound of his own voice. But someone else is pulling Ngozi's strings. The next day, Obinna called. I heard about the zoning block, he said. You're under fire. Olana didn't hide her irritation. From your family, no less. He winced. Kane speaks for himself. But I do think Ngozi isn't working alone. She narrowed her eyes. What do you know? Nothing yet. But give me time. I still have contacts in state infrastructure. I don't want your help, she said coldly. He hesitated. Then take this as a warning, not help. Someone wants to make sure you fail in Nigeria. He hung up before she could reply. Despite the pushback, Olana pressed on. She mobilized her team, organized public forums, and released a detailed manifesto of the project. Everywhere she went, women showed up. Carpenters, civil engineers, street traders, coders, retired teachers, mothers. They chanted, Ndi Nwanyi Nayu Abodo. Women are building the city. The energy was unstoppable. But then came the land dispute. An old man claiming ancestral ownership of part of the land appeared with court documents. It's fake, Namdi said after reviewing the papers. They're trying to drag the project into years of litigation. Olana exhaled. This isn't just sabotage, it's war. Late that night, Olana sat alone in her living room, sifting through papers. A knock came at the door. It was Ngozi, wearing a crisp cream suit. She entered without invitation and looked around. You've come far, Ngozi said. But sometimes the higher you go, the more dangerous your fall. Olana stood still. Why are you doing this? Ngozi turned, eyes fierce. You abandoned our dream, Olana. You left to marry a billionaire. Left me to climb alone. And now you want to come back and overshadow everything I worked for? That's not true, Olana whispered. It doesn't matter if it is, Ngozi said. Perception is more powerful than truth. She left, and Olana finally realized this wasn't about politics. It was personal. The sky over Lagos was gray with approaching rain as bulldozers stood idle on the sandy grounds of Ndinwanyi City. For the first time since its conception, the project had gone completely still. Not for lack of funding, not because of lack of support, but because of the growing storm of betrayal, legal interference, and public distortion. A storm carefully brewed to discredit one woman's dream. Olana sat in her office, the blinds drawn, the silence heavy. She stared at a single sheet of paper, the court order halting all construction until the ancestral land dispute was resolved. The lies were thick, and the truth was barely loud enough to whisper through them. The breaking point. That evening, Namdi stormed into her office, visibly agitated. We just got an email from our U.S. donor, Mabel Trust. They're suspending their second phase funding due to reputational concerns. Olana closed her eyes. One by one, pillars were falling. They said they'll reconsider once the zoning, heritage, and security concerns are cleared, he added. She opened her laptop. Her inbox was full of messages from journalists, activists, and even supporters asking the same question. Is it true you built on stolen land? Are you discriminating against men? Is this just a personal vendetta wrapped in empowerment? She couldn't breathe. Suddenly, it wasn't just the city that felt under attack. It was her identity. At home, she pulled out the small black journal shed once kept as Obinna's wife. Back then, she had poured her insecurities and dreams into those pages. Dreams no one listened to. A faded line stared back at her. If no one gives me space, I'll carve my own. She wiped her eyes. She had come too far to let this storm drown her. The next day, Obinna visited. This time, not at the office. He came to her house, stood outside, uninvited, and waited until she stepped out onto the balcony. Can we talk? He asked. I've run out of words, she said coolly. He sighed. Then let me do something. She raised a brow. I know someone at the Ministry of Urban Planning, he continued. He can make the zoning issues disappear. Quietly. But you'd have to withdraw from your public feminist messaging. Water it down. Alana's eyes burned. So I sell my voice. To buy peace? It's just strategy, he said gently. Temporarily. Once the city is built, you can say whatever you want. She laughed bitterly. You still don't get it, do you? The problem isn't what I'm saying. It's who is saying it. Obina's voice dropped. You're not wrong. But sometimes power plays chess, not emotion. I'd rather lose with truth, she said, than win by silencing myself again. Obina nodded slowly. Then you'll be fighting this alone. I already am, she said, and shut the door. Meanwhile, Ngozi wasn't done. She had leaked private meeting recordings, twisted quotes, and encouraged men's groups to protest gender apartheid in front of the construction gates. Placards read, "Where's our place in her city? A future without men is a future of hate. Don't divide our daughters from us." The media, hungry for controversy, amplified every voice except Olana's. Namdi advised, "We need to strike back. Release the emails proving Ngozi's involvement. Expose her hypocrisy." But Olana hesitated. "Let me ask you something," she said to him. "If I tear her down to save this dream, what example do I leave for the women coming after me?" Namdi frowned. "So what? You let her win?" "No," she said. "I show that power doesn't always have to destroy to lead." The next day, Olana held a surprise press conference. No stage, no expensive hall. Just her, standing at the halted construction site, boots in red soil, flanked by local women workers. She faced the cameras with a calm fierceness. "I didn't build this project to exclude men. I built it to include women in a way they've never been included before. This is not a wall, it's a door. And when it opens to all who believe in justice, fairness, and progress." She held up a new plan, a mixed-use section within the city, open to all but led by female developers and civil engineers. Not a concession, a strategy of unity. The media went silent for a beat. Then the applause began. Even skeptical voices in government began to retreat. Because Olana had done something rare. She had responded to attack with vision. Legacy rekindled. Weeks later, construction resumed under court clearance. Ngozi, publicly questioned by her own political party, announced a leave of absence. Obina never came back again. Not with help, not with apologies. But Olana didn't need him anymore. She stood atop a scaffolding one warm afternoon, looking at the growing structure of the first women-run bank, just a block from where the girls' robotics school would stand. Namdi passed her a cold bottle of water. "You realize you've started something people will study for generations?" She smiled. "I didn't start it," she said. "I just stopped running from it." It was a humid Wednesday morning in Lagos when the envelope arrived. Unmarked, hand-delivered, and slipped beneath the gate of Olana's private residence in Ikoyi. She might have ignored it, but something about the handwriting, the curved O in her name, pulled her in. Olana sat on the edge of her kitchen stool, peeled the seal open, and unfolded the single sheet inside. There were only 3 lines. "I never stopped watching your rise. You're stronger than I imagined. But you don't know everything." It was signed Anulika. Anulika. The name stirred pain like a sudden gust of wind tearing through old curtains. Her half-sister. The first wound. Same father, different mothers. Raised worlds apart. While Olana lived in a middle-class estate with books, art, and ballet recitals, Anulika lived in the village, raised by her grandmother with nothing but farming tools and resentment. They met only twice in their teens. Both times, bitterness clung like smoke. And then, Anulika disappeared, vanished. No calls, no visits, no explanations, just silence for over 15 years. Until now, Olana showed the letter to Namdi. He frowned. "This is either a warning or a trap." "I need to know which," she said. They hired a discreet investigator, someone who once worked in the DSS but now handled private affairs quietly. Within a few days, he returned with news. "Anulika is alive," the man said. "Lives in Enugu. Owns a small private security consultancy. Keeps her face out of the public. No photos online. Very off-grid." Olana's heartbeat skipped. "Is she involved in politics?" No. But she's connected to people who are. Silent investor in a political advisory firm. Mostly opposition. Alana leaned back in her chair. And why write to me now? The man hesitated. She's been watching you. That's not a guess. That's a fact. Cameras picked her up at your Abuja keynote last year, hooded, in the crowd. Alana's mouth went dry. What was Anulika watching for? Alana didn't send a letter back. She flew down. No press, no entourage, just her and Namdi, pretending to be a married couple on a private retreat. They drove out to the outskirts of Nsukka, down a red earth path lined with mango trees, until they reached a bungalow behind a high wall. Alana's chest tightened as she stood at the gate. A woman opened it before they could knock. Anulika, older now, leaner, braided hair pulled back tight. Still sharp, just like their fathers. Come in, she said simply, then turned and walked inside. They sat in a plain sitting room with woven mats and wooden stools. No AC, no distractions. Alana looked at her half-sister. You disappeared. Anulika shrugged. I had nothing to offer back then, and too much anger to stay visible. Why write me now? Anulika stared at her. Because you don't know who funded the first smear campaign against you. Alana's body tensed. What do you mean? I mean that when you left Obina, when you began your rise, he wasn't the only one who feared you. Anulika walked to a shelf and pulled out a flash drive. There are emails, conversations, leaked payment trails. Someone powerful paid multiple groups, male rights activists, political operatives, even influencers, to discredit your city idea before it could grow wings. Who? Alana asked. Anulika paused, then said a name that froze Alana's spine. Senator Ibrahim Gwarzo, a powerful northern politician, conservative, ambitious, and publicly polite. But behind the curtains, a puppet master. Alana's jaw clenched. Why would he care what I build? Because you're changing the language, Anulika said. He sees women who don't wait. He sees independence as rebellion. He sees your success as the gateway for others. Alana whispered. He's rumored to be running for president. He can't afford a city that makes women feel powerful. Alana looked down. Why are you helping me? Anulika smiled faintly. Because we carry the same blood. And for years I hated that. But watching you from the shadows, I realized I didn't want your light to go out. Because your fire makes room for mine. Before she left, Alana hugged her sister. Awkwardly, stiffly, but honestly. I'm not asking you to be my family, Anulika said, voice low. But it'll be your shield if the fight gets uglier. And it will. As Alana walked out of the compound, heart pounding, one thought echoed in her mind. I thought the fight was about Ngozi or Obina. I was wrong. It's about power. And those who refuse to let it go. Back to Lagos. When she returned to Lagos, Alana didn't tell anyone, not even Namdi, what Anulika had revealed. Instead, she began making quiet moves, transferring the city's legal control to a women-led holding trust, creating redundancy in leadership, moving funding sources offshore, setting up whistleblower channels in case of sabotage. She was no longer just building a city. She was fortifying it, because now she understood the real truth. You can build gates, you can name cities, but if you want to survive the storm, you must be the storm. Abuja, Nigeria's polished facade of power, was sweltering under the weight of whispers. Rumors had spread fast. Alana Chukwuma was going to testify before the Senate Urban Development Committee. The topic? Alleged zoning violations, misuse of international donor funds, and dangerous feminist architecture. The hearing was scheduled at the request of Senator Ibrahim Gwarzo, veiled under urban ethics. But those in the know understood it was an ambush. And Alana was walking straight into the lion's den. The National Assembly Hall was packed. Television crews, lobbyists, whispers, folded arms, cold stares. The air was thick with judgment. Alana stepped in wearing a deep blue power suit tailored to the inch, with no jewelry and no smile, just presence. As she took her seat in front of the semicircle of lawmakers, including Senator Gwarzo himself, the murmurs died. Miss Chukuma, he began with a falsely sweet tone. Thank you for appearing today. We understand you are leading a gendered infrastructure project. I am leading a community infrastructure project designed for inclusion, security, and economic innovation, Olana replied calmly. Guarzo leaned forward. Yet your blueprint excludes men from property ownership. Is that not discriminatory? Pause. Olana met his gaze squarely. No more than Nigeria has excluded women from land titles for decades without anyone in this room blinking. Gasps rippled. Cameras zoomed in. Senator MBA, Guarzo's ally, lifted a paper. Are you aware that certain NGOs have raised concerns that funds meant for inclusive development are being funneled into a biased private city? Olana turned to the audience. I'll address that clearly, she said. Ndinwanyi City has passed 3 financial audits. All funds are accounted for. What you call bias is, in fact, a corrective investment in a system that has denied women space, safety, and voice. The chairman interrupted. And who gives you the right to correct the system? Olana smiled just slightly. The Constitution, and the women who voted, protested, bled, and died for their daughters to live better. Mid-hearing, a commotion began. Senators' phones buzzed simultaneously. On Twitter, Instagram, and national news outlets, leaked documents had just gone live. Internal communications, payments, strategy memos, proof that the attacks on Olana City, the zoning obstruction, and the coordinated smear campaign were all orchestrated by a shadow coalition of politicians, including Guarzo himself. The source of the leak? An anonymous whistleblower file, codenamed Sisterizing_001. Back in Enugu, Anulika closed her laptop and smiled grimly. Senator Guarzo's face drained of color. He stammered. This is fabrication, digital fraud, deep fakes. But journalists were already swarming the exits. News anchors were confirming legitimacy. 2 senators stood and quietly left the room. And in that instant, for the first time in public record, a powerful Nigerian politician was caught in a failed gendered sabotage campaign live. The chairman banged the gavel to adjourn the hearing. But no one was listening anymore. As Olana exited through the back corridor, Namdi was waiting. His eyes were wide. You didn't leak that, did you? She shook her head. I told you I have a sister now. Namdi let out a breath. You just exposed one of the most connected men in Nigerian politics. And I'm still standing, she said, almost like a vow. The impact was immediate. Senator Guarzo stepped down temporarily. Investigations were launched into urban development corruption. Women across the country, market women, tech girls, midwives, lecturers, flooded social media with the hashtag #GateNoMore. And international donors tripled their support for Olana City project within 48 hours. Even Ngozi, silent for weeks, posted on LinkedIn. I don't always agree with Olana, but history is watching, and she is moving the hands of the clock. That night, Olana returned to her Lagos home. She walked barefoot onto her balcony, sipping zobo from a clay cup, staring at the city skyline. She thought of her mother's quiet dignity, her sister's silent power, the broken marriage that once made her feel less than whole. And now, the city began as a sketch. Lines on paper, a dream whispered late at night, a promise to a mother who died too soon, to a sister lost too long, to a self once abandoned at the gate. Now, it was rising from the red earth. Ndinwanyi, the city of women. The cranes moved like synchronized dancers above skeletal buildings. Roads curved with purpose. Solar panels glittered. Market hubs were designed like village courtyards, open, warm, communal. It was more than concrete. It was healing made visible. One humid morning, Olana stood on the central foundation stone, instructing architects when her phone rang. The caller ID, Obinna. She hadn't spoken to him since that day at the airport. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But something urged her to answer. Hello? Olana, his voice was slower, tired. I'm in Lagos. I want to meet. Please. She hesitated. Why? Because what I have to say doesn't belong in a voicemail. They met at a neutral rooftop restaurant overlooking the lagoon. No crowd, no cameras, just the wind and the ghosts of what they used to be. Olana arrived in black trousers and a rust-colored blouse. Strong, elegant. Obina looked older, grayer, thinner. Regret was written across his face like an old poem. "I won't waste your time," he said. "I came to give you something." He handed her a folder. Inside, a deed. A tract of land on the Lekki Peninsula. Prime real estate. Millions in value. "What is this?" she asked, suspicious. "My father left it in a blind trust," Obina said quietly. "I'm transferring it to you. You can use it to expand the city. Or sell it. Or burn it. It's yours." "Why?" she asked again, slower. "Because I watched you grow wings, while I stayed small. And I finally realized. I left behind a queen, and all I married after was silence." Olana nodded. "I accept the land," she said. Obina looked hopeful. "Does that mean?" "No," she cut in gently but firmly. "This isn't a bridge. It's a tombstone. Thank you for honoring it." Obina lowered his gaze. "I deserved worse." She stood. "But you gave me the storm I needed. Without you leaving me at that gate, I might never have flown." She turned and walked away. This time, she was the one leaving him behind. 1 year later, the sky was soft pink on the morning of the grand opening. Dignitaries arrived. Women from all over Nigeria, from Sokoto to Calabar, stepped through the wide, arching gates. Children laughed. Drummers played. Poets recited verses written in Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, and English. Olana stood at the center of it all in white, a geli wrapped like a crown, her eyes misty. Ngozi was beside her, clapping, crying. Anulika stood farther off in the crowd, watching silently, hand over heart. When Olana was handed the microphone, she said only this: "This city is not a rebellion. It is a return to dignity, to dreams, to each other. This is not a beginning or an end. This is home." The crowd erupted. The gates stayed open. Later that night, in her study, Olana framed a photo from the opening day beside her mother's old wedding portrait. Then she penned a single line in her journal. "Once, I was left at the gate. Now I build the gates, and I decide who walks through them."